Hi again, everybody. Welcome to Wisconsin Icons. I am Bob Dolan, and I'm very pleased and grateful that you are with us again for this episode. My title sponsor all year long is Pasternak and Zergabel, injury attorneys, award-winning injury attorneys, and you can find their help and assistance at www.injurywisconsin.com. My icon today is a very familiar face and a very famous and familiar voice, and his name is Dan Small. Dan Small, for nearly 50 years, believe it or not, has been kind of the go-to guy for all lovers in Wisconsin of the outdoors, hunting and fishing, etc. He's been advising us. He has been teaching us. He's been sharing experiences with us. And he's hugely popular, at least in my opinion, as an avid viewer, because bottom line, we believe that Dan Small is one of us. All of us can see Dan Small fitting perfectly in our hunting group. And I'm happy to welcome him as this episode's Wisconsin icon. And there he is. That's the familiar face, a bearded familiar face. And in a minute, you're going to hear the very famous and familiar voice. Dan Small, good morning and welcome to Wisconsin Icons.
Bob, good to see you. You almost said Dan Smith.
I did. I know. I don't know who Dan Smith is.
Well, I do, and that reminds me of a story. We've all got stories.
Yeah.
When Tommy Thompson was governor, he and I were hiking the Ice Age Trail for an event in the fall. I think it was commemorating the development or the expansion of the Ice Age Trail. And the way the governor hiked the Ice Age Trail was they flew him with a helicopter to Holy Hill, and we met him there, and then we walked up a couple hundred yards and walked a section of trail, and then I flew with him up to Buffalo Don's in Manitowoc County. I don't know if it's still there, but they bottled water, spring water. And they had a big tent, and he walks in there, and we walked about 300 yards of trail. Okay, so we were hiking the Ice Age Trail. And just before he walked in, he asked one of his attendants, where are we and who are these people? And they told him. And he walks in, and I'd been with him in the plane, and he introduced me as Dan Smith. And I didn't correct him, and Dan Smith apparently was a broadcaster in Madison at the time. We're talking back in the 80s.
Okay.
So there we were, and credit to Tommy. I loved working with him because he was a man of the people. He would he would talk to people. He worked both sides of the aisle, unlike some other governors and legislators. And he was fun to be with, and he was an outdoorsman. He
big time.
He didn't fish and didn't spend a lot of time doing that. But anyway, so that's totally off topic here, but I couldn't resist that opportunity.
For some reason, I'm on the same vibe this morning as Governor Thompson. I don't know.
There you go, and that's nothing wrong with that, right?
And I'll have to find the real Dan Smith and maybe have him on a show just to make up for it. But no, Dan Small. This was the easiest introduction I've ever done, Dan. You just kind of took it and ran. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining me. See you later. Bye bye.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's an honor. I mean, we've been watching you, Dan, for. Well, in the introduction, I said nearly 50 years. How long have you been doing this?
Outdoor Wisconsin debuted in November of 1984.
All right.
And it's been on every week since then, although it's been out of production now since 2020, since COVID put a stop to a lot of activity.
Yeah.
Channel 10, Milwaukee PBS, which produces and owns the show, the general manager at the time said, I'm not sending crews of two people out in a van together. And so they stopped local production and have not resumed it. I need to have a conversation with them. And
you do. Yeah. Now you still do the radio. Is that correct?
Yes. I started my radio show back in 2006 with Judy Nugent, who had been on the TV show with me. And we started with a podcast on Lake Link. And then WISN picked us up, and we blossomed from there into now I have 22 stations in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Judy left for greener pastures after 2 years, and I brought on Jeff Kelm, who is he's a young fellow. He's 30 years younger than I am, but anyway, a young fellow from Sheboygan who had some radio experience. And we started doing the show together, and he's been with me now 16 of those 18 years. And I couldn't do the show without him. He edits it, he puts it together. I record most of the interviews, and we broadcast it on a number of stations, basically on Saturday morning.
Okay.
And then it's available also as a podcast.
Dan, take us way back. I mean, how, when, why did this all begin?
My goodness. Well, I grew up in Western New York, as I told you when we talked a couple months ago, hunting and fishing, basically. My dad was a high school principal. He was a Marine, a World War II vet, and he came back and with a lot of his buddies wanted to get outdoors, and he spent as much time hunting and fishing as his job allowed, especially with 3 boys in the family. I'm the oldest of three boys, and then my sister came along 18 years later. Surprised everybody, but she's been a great addition to our family, and I love her dearly. And she got into the fishing too, but it was, kind of a late start for her. But for my brothers and me, that's what we did.
Okay.
We went fishing as kids. Dad would take us on sometimes weekend camp outs, or sometimes a summer week or 2 vacation up in the Adirondacks of New York. Western New York is much like parts of Wisconsin. There are streams everywhere. It's glaciated. It's very reminiscent of either the Driftless area where I live now or southeast Wisconsin, the Kettle Moraine, and a lot of small lakes, and of course the 2 Great Lakes, Erie and Ontario, like we have here in Wisconsin. We have Michigan and Superior, and so I grew up fishing those small streams, little ponds, and Lake Erie and Lake Ontario.
How'd you end up in Wisconsin?
Well, I was teaching college French in Albany, New York for 3 years, and got downsized there and started looking for a job. And among the offers, one came from Northland College, which is up in Ashland, right on Lake Superior. They're about a mile from the lake. And they offered me a job, and I went and had a visit and wasn't terribly impressed with the physical plant. It wasn't very big and there wasn't much to it back then. It has grown considerably since then. And they offered my wife at the time a job, and we both considered that. And then they sent me the college catalog for that year, 1972, I believe it was. And a recent grad named Mike Brasic was standing on the Bayfield dock. The photo inside the front cover. He was standing on the Bayfield dock in his cap and gown, holding what was at that time the world record brown trout. And I said, okay, that's got to be the place. And that's my story for how I accepted that job. So I ended up teaching at Northland for 20 years and had been writing a little bit for Outdoor Life and other publications, and then got into it a little more and just kind of picked up where I left off in New York. The fishing and hunting here in Wisconsin are unparalleled, really. I mean, they were great in New York, which some people don't understand. It's a very rural state outside of the boroughs in New York City and Long Island. But Wisconsin is very similar and has a lot of opportunities. And I just got right into it and started writing for Wisconsin Sportsman magazine. Called my director, the man who became my director, Jack Abrams, who was recently hired there at Milwaukee PBS, and he was given the assignment of creating this outdoor show. And they had a host who took a job out of state. He did a pilot, and they got a lot of good response from the pilot. So they were looking for somebody, and I called him, and he said, "Can you come down for an interview?" And I did, and the rest is history. I went down there that summer, and we started shooting, and the show premiered November 1st of 1984.
It's interesting, Dan, how many of us kind of fall into a career. I mean, so clearly when you moved from New York to Wisconsin, hosting an outdoor show on television was probably the furthest thing from your mind. And here you are almost 50 years later, which always fascinates and intrigues me. Do you still love it?
I enjoy most of the aspects of it. TV production is a real challenge. I'm still doing the deer show, which just aired this month in November. We call it Deer Hunt, Wisconsin. We've been producing that since 1991, and I took it over, owning it and producing it, and basically doing the whole thing with a partner, Mark LaBarbera, who's been with me now for a decade. And we use a videographer who used to work with Dave Carlson up in Eau Claire. Dave Roll is the videographer, and so the three of us put this show together. And I in TV or radio production, there are ups and downs. There are those in any job, but the finished product is is kind of the payoff. And
it's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, people ask me, do you like writing? And I said, because I see myself more as a writer than anything else. And I said, I like having written. I like the finished product. The process sometimes is a chore. But, at an age when most of my classmates from high school and college are either dead or retired, I'm still working. And I'm working harder now than probably ever in my life, with a TV show and writing for Wisconsin Outdoor News, and the radio show, which takes up quite a bit of time.
You mentioned, Dan, your dad and your older brothers kind of, walked you into the sport. And I wonder if that's how it is for the great majority, Dan. I mean, it's kind of a pass down from one generation to another thing. A, is that true? And B, if not true, I've only been hunting, Dan, a handful of times. My dad did not hunt. My older brother did not hunt. My uncles, I just didn't have the opportunity. So I've only been 4 or 5 times. Is the love of hunting and fishing, is that something that one can just acquire at any age, or does it really help to have it kind of like you did in your DNA?
It helps tremendously to get an early start, Bob.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm the oldest of the 3 brothers.
Okay.
But so as I mentioned earlier, we did it as just a matter of course. We didn't know any better. We went fishing on the weekend,
Right.
And I think here and I see it in Wisconsin, and I saw it with my friends growing up in rural upstate New York. When pheasant season opened, if you showed up with your hunting vest, your hunting license, and your shotgun, they would let us out of school on the opening day of pheasant season. Now, you can't get anywhere near a school with a shotgun today without getting arrested. And in some places here in Wisconsin, when the gun deer season opens, the school is closed for that whole week of Thanksgiving, because the students are going to play hooky, and a lot of the teachers want to go hunting as well. I think it's much easier if you have family who get you into it, who've already done it, who have the gear and the knowledge. But adult onset hunting is a thing, and there are people here in Wisconsin and nationwide who are actively recruiting new hunters who are adults who are thinking, well, I want to know where my food comes from. I want to eat organic food. Excuse me. I want to be more responsible for providing my nourishment. And I want to learn about this hunting and fishing thing. Why is it such an attraction to so many people? The number of hunters is declining nationwide, and here in Wisconsin, I don't know the exact numbers, but 20 years ago, there were about 700,000 people who stepped into the woods on the opening day of gun deer season. This year, 20 years later, about 500,000. Still 500,000. That's a big army.
Yeah.
But 200,000 people.
That's significant. Absolutely.
It is. And it's because my generation is aging out of the sport, and there aren't as many young people picking it up, and not as many people have the connections that were readily available when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
Fewer people live in rural areas. Fewer people have a grandpa or an uncle with a farm. Many Wisconsinites still have a second home up on a lake somewhere, the summer home. But that's and deer camps, those are disappearing, and the second homes are being sold, and that whole lifestyle is gradually weakening and disappearing. I think it's going to be around for a long time yet, but
Yeah,
I won't be around to see the end of hunting and fishing, but our grandchildren just might. You never know.
my goodness. That's rather alarming. I would not have ever imagined such a scenario. Uh, Explain the exhilaration that you and all people who love to hunt. I mean, explain, what you feel, what you go through, planning a trip, doing the trip, after the trip, how does it hit you? How do you feel?
Well, the feeling is exhilaration is a word I think you used. It's a good one. Uh, to do it right, you need to plan and prepare. I know hunters who have a plastic tote, one of these big tote boxes, that you can put all your gear in for each season, turkey, deer, small game, and so on. And they just pull that out and they've got all their clothes in there and they're ready to go.
Yeah.
But, you need to make sure, in the case of deer hunting, you need to make sure your rifle is functioning, that it's sighted in, that the sight hasn't gone out of whack since last season. Maybe you dropped it or it got bumped or something. And then you need to have a place to hunt. If you don't have relatives with land, or if you don't own land yourself. Now, my son owns the land where he grew up, so that's where I hunt, up in Bayfield County. But for people who don't have that, they have to establish connections somehow, somewhere, or hunt on public land. And there's millions of acres of public land here in Wisconsin that is open to hunting and fishing and hiking and camping and all the other outdoor pursuits. So there's that preparation. And then there's a mystique about opening day. It's like, the Brewers opener. It's a big thing. The first home game for the Packers, a big deal. Well, opening day of trout season or muskie season or deer season, pheasant season, it's almost a religious event. It ought to be a holiday. And as I mentioned earlier, some of those openers are holidays in some areas of the state and elsewhere in the country. Dove hunting, for example, comes to mind. We started dove hunting here in Wisconsin about 20 years ago. It is practiced in almost every state. There are a few that don't. Doves are the most abundant bird in America. They are the most popular game bird in America. More shotgun shells are fired at doves on opening day, which is September 1st, nationwide, than probably in any other time of year at any other game or target. You go to Arizona or Texas or New Mexico, I mean, it's a way of life down there. So I'm kind of rambling on this, but okay, so let's get into the woods now. Let's take deer again, because it's the season.
Yeah.
People used to hunt with groups. Many people I know had deer camps of 2 or 5 or 15 or more relatives or friends. And there's a great video. Gosh, I can't think of the guy's name, but I will send you a link, and he's somebody you ought to talk to as well. He produced a video on deer camps in Wisconsin a number of years ago. And he went to deer camps up north. And these are places where a lot of times they're second home or just a cabin with no plumbing or, just wood heat. And guys go, and sometimes women too, but mostly guys go, and they spend that first weekend and maybe the whole 9 days. I have a couple of friends who spend the whole 9 days of the deer season up in the North Woods, up in Price County. And I remember my friend Brad, and he knows who I'm talking about here, because I know he'll see this. He told me his second year with a new girlfriend, he said, I'm going up to deer camp for 9 days. And she said, you did that last year. And I said, oh boy. Well, she has learned now. Now they love to travel. They go all over the country, and they travel all over the world. And they follow the Packers. They went to San Diego for a game a couple of years ago, and they went to London to see the Packers lose to the Giants. Was that last year or the year before? But for him, And he made this point very clear, and she understands deer season is his thing. This is his time to be with his friends, with Pete and Mike, the two brothers who co-own the cabin where they stay, where his dad stayed. And the heads of the deer they shot are on the wall.
Sure.
And he carved his initials in a yellow birch tree when he was 14. And he found that tree, it had died, and he cut it off, and he brought that stump section to a shoot when we were doing a segment for Deer Hunt, Wisconsin. And he said, this was, a tree that I carved my initials in when I was 14. And, I still have that connection with that place in the woods. And so, I mean, I hope most people have a special place or a special activity that they really enjoy. And
it sounds like, Dan, then a lot of the exhilaration that you feel is based on the past. It's a part of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's exclusive to the hunting community. Golfers would do the same thing. Hey, I'm going to take 5 days every summer with my buddies, and we're going to go golfing, or we're going to do this and that. And it's often just based more on the relationships of who you're with, yes, other than the activity itself.
It is, and yet, now, let me get into the personal part of it. For me, because I'm actually a rather private person. You wouldn't know that. People see me on TV and they think that, I'm always doing things with friends, but I'm probably happiest when I'm all alone in the woods with a shotgun and a turkey call, or with my rifle, and, 8 hours of daylight, hoping that a deer will walk by, where nothing goes through my mind except observing what's going on in nature around me. I'll hear a squirrel, I'll see a woodpecker. A couple of years ago, I had a pileated woodpecker, spent most of the morning working a dead cedar 10 yards from my stand. And I had a camera with me. And so I took my camera and I was videoing this woodpecker going up and down the tree and looking for grubs. And I think he knew I was there, but I didn't bother him. And so I got to see a side of nature that, you don't see unless you spend some time outdoors. You don't have to have a gun with you. And a lot of people say, well, you can just go out and watch the birds. Yeah, you can. But, there's another purpose for my being there. And that's to try to put a bullet in a deer and bring home some venison, or shoot a turkey. And I love wild turkey meat, and I love talking to them. And turkey hunting is such a rush, because they gobble and you yelp like a lovesick hen, and maybe they come in and maybe they don't. And, the whole thing is trying to figure out why that bird is doing what he's doing. Why isn't he coming to me? And when it works and you're successful, there's quite an exhilarating rush from that experience.
Is there a hunt, Dan, that you've never participated in, or have you tried them all?
I have not hunted wild boar. We don't have any here in Wisconsin.
Okay.
We got a few probably wandering around somewhere, but I've been invited to boar hunts. I just haven't done it. Have not hunted in the Rocky Mountains. I've hunted out west. Did an antelope hunt with my son back in 1988, I think it was, and we each shot a real nice antelope that year and loved it. Had a great time in Montana, and have fished out there. Fished pretty much all over the country, but most of my hunting's been in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and New York, where I grew up.
Dan, you've got one of those voices that people could hear your voice without seeing your face and know right away that that's Dan Small. So I salute your career. I salute you're forever identified now as the hunting and fishing guy, which is really cool. And you made it all from scratch. I'm sure you look back at times and say, well, I didn't really plan this, but it worked out pretty good.
It did, and you're right, I didn't plan it. And I think if I you're right, I didn't plan it. And I think if I had my life to live over again, I would maybe make some plans. I don't know that I would go in a different direction, because I think where I've ended up, but it's been an interesting journey, and I'm still learning it in my late 70s.
How much have you thought about how much longer you want to do this?
Well, radio is easy, as you know. I've said jokingly, as long as they can wheel me in front of a microphone, I can do radio. TV, I don't know. I'll probably do the Deer Show for a couple more years. It's a labor of love, and we have a lot of help from people who provide video for us. And we interview the DNR and other experts, and we're shooting video now for next year already. And I don't know, a couple more years maybe.
As long as you still love it.
I do.
I left radio long before the wheelchair, Dan. I didn't want to wait for the wheelchair.
But now you're doing podcasts and video.
I love it.
Whatever you call this.
I don't know what to call it yet. I don't know. Heck, I didn't even know your name at the beginning of this episode. I don't know what to call this.
Right.
Dan, I've been a fan from afar for a long time. And that's saying something because, you know, hunting's not in my blood, but I still watch your show. The production value is very good. The host is very good. You're a likable man. I think that's why the show is very popular. And I greatly appreciate your time today on Wisconsin Icons. Okay. You've been a joy.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Take care, Dan.